Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 134 Why Embroidery? All right, everybody, welcome into the Take Up. Happy to have you guys back and to be back for this Education Friday to answer one of the most important questions that we get asked as embroiderers, whether we are in a commercial sphere or not. Though, honestly, I'm going to be talking a lot about selling embroidery today, though I think it is also fair to say sometimes when we're discussing embroidery or even defining it for ourselves, that these same concepts come up when we talk about the value of what we do and what is uniquely valuable about the medium of embroidery. So, really, we're going to talk about why embroidery. How do we sell on the strengths of embroidery? How do we, for one thing, stop apologizing for it? And I'll elaborate on that for some of you. Certainly have heard me discuss this before, but perhaps not in this detail, perhaps not in this way. It'll be more of a discussion, an open discussion today. So the one thing I'm going to definitely ask you guys to do is if you are here live, if you are listening in, whether you're on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, please comment, share your experiences, discuss the value of embroidery, how you sell embroidery, and the kinds of things that you encounter when defining to people why embroidery is valuable, what it is good for, what makes sense in embroidery, maybe what doesn't, and the way that you approach communicating the value of what you do, of what we do, and perhaps of your own shop, of your own work. That's something I would love to have you guys do. So definitely kick in and share as we go through some of this stuff. We've got some good material here, I think. I'm going to be sharing things that I've actually presented previously at paid events. So truthfully, they've been kind of the joke is that they've been in content jail. I like to leave things alone and exclusive for some time if I prepared something for a particular event, but sometimes I feel like it is time to share some of the things that end up in that content jail or behind a paywall so that we can discuss them. Mostly in a more open fashion that's not quite like a presentation, so I'm not giving the entirety of a presentation or running down the slide deck, but I am going to share with you some insights that some of my compatriots in the industry found valuable when thinking about embroidery, especially people who aren't dedicated in the field of embroidery all the time. In any case, though, I'm a little bit under the weather still. I'm coming back around. I know I was gone last week, but I will be doing my level best to give you everything I have today to make this a valuable episode. And I would very much appreciate any of you guys who are here live to share in the comments your experiences about showing the value of embroidery and answering the question why embroidery, why it's important, why it's the right choice for certain work, why it's the right choice for your particular use case for your particular clients. What does it make sense to you and why do you choose it? Like I said, either as an artist or as a commercial person or as a bit of both, as I am. But before that, I'd like to say hi to everybody. You guys know I love the live interaction. So if you're here and if you're commenting, the chances are I will call you out and I will go ahead and say hi to you, especially on a day like today where on the other podcast that I produce, it's an award show day for the Reggies. And there were some wonderful commentaries from people recommending other groups, uh, showing everybody who had helped them through the year. And this show, as well as myself, I got some nominations. So there will be some nominations for those awards coming up. So thank you very much to any of you guys who are reciprocators, who are listeners and watchers at the Take Up for voting for me for the Reggies. That was very nice of you. And thank you for the recognition. Knowing that what I do is helpful to you is why I keep doing it. If anything I do can help you to um, express yourself better, make your embroidery better, make your living. If anything I do helps that, then that is what I am here to do and what I want to be doing. It's what drives me to keep coming back every Friday that I can. But let me say hi to you, some of you folks. If you are listening to replay, you don't want to hit, go ahead and fast forward. That's fine. But we still love you. Hashtag replay squad when you can get in. But for the folks who are live, first, awesome community share and fellow person who was nominated this morning, Frank Dunn from out in the UK. Good evening, Frank, and thank you for being here. We have Barb in saying, good afternoon to everyone from North Central Minnesota. I'm here from Albuquerque, New Mexico, as you guys know, landlocked island as it is in the American Southwest. But happy to have North Central Minnesota represented. And Woody's in from Wintry, Wisconsin. Appreciate education. Hey, appreciate you being here, Woody. Thank you. Barb is in. Hi. Happy to have you in. Sally says, "Good evening. Hope you're fully recovered. Not quite, but doing okay. Doesn't I don't think I've got the big illness, but what I'll say is crushing headaches. So if I look a little pained as I'm staring into my ring light, that's probably why. But I'm going to do my best anyway. Couldn't leave you guys for 2 weeks." And Aaron says, "Congratulations on the nominations. Thank you. That was very awesome." And Yosta says, "Hi, all going to be interesting. I hope so. Yeah, for sure." Beck says, I'm finally back on the road 2 months. I got a nasty virus put me in bed. Hey, do I ever know how that feels, Beck? Hope you are feeling better. Marta is in from Texas. Hi, Marta. Happy to have you there. Bill says, hi, Eric. Glad you're feeling better. Glad you're here, Bill, and thank you for the well wishes. Justin has showed up. Hello, hello. Hi, Justin. And we have Barb in. Oh, yeah. Barb saying hi. Hi as well, saying hi to each other. And Austin in from Twitch. Thank you for joining in on the Twitch channel. Not a lot of folks over at Twitch. Happy to have you in as well. Feel free to comment if you have stuff to ask or things that you want to tip in. If you're an embroidery professional, especially, and have dealt with doing that, you're out in Houston, Texas. Hello. Happy to have you here. Neighbor. Here in New Mexico. But yeah, if you have experiences, like I said, especially a lot of this is in the commercial sphere, because as you guys know, I really came from the business to business commercial sphere of embroidery. So most of my experiences come from that place. What I'm going to tell you though, is that as I have dealt more and more with fiber artists, with crafters, with people who are in that space that I often call prosumers, where they may be doing some commercial work or they're doing commissioned work for individual pieces. Heck, this even goes down to cosplayers. And frankly, a lot of this stuff, even though I'm going to talk specifically about embroidery, some of the things about value speak to anything that we do, any labor we put in. I've had this same discussion with heat printers, sublimators, screen printers. It doesn't matter who you are, but I will say the people who have accessed the commercial world by starting on their own with craft level equipment, maybe going to craft table sales, going to individual sales on Etsy or craft stores, those people have a tendency sometimes, if they haven't kind of had a taste of that commercial sphere, to undervalue themselves or to not see that value in what they're doing. And the other thing I wanted to kind of gripe on a little bit today is maybe it's not so much as a gripe, but the things that I want to kind of define and work around are, like I said, the concept of apologizing for embroidery. I have lots of folks who I talk to on a daily basis who are coming to embroidery, often from another medium, from print, and they spend a lot of their time uh, bringing embroidery to places that it doesn't always work and then kind of apologizing for the things it can't do, rather than what I consider kind of the right way to handle this, which is not only accepting embroidery but working with embroidery and through those kind of maybe the weaknesses, the areas where it's a little soft, and going into the places where it makes the most sense, selling it on its strengths and explaining to people proactively, and we'll get there, what embroidery does well and what it does uniquely that sets it apart, that makes it something uniquely valuable for its own merits, right? So we're going to talk about all of that stuff. I've got some weird asides that I'll go on, as I always do. You guys know I get to be a little cerebral when I talk about this stuff, but in general, that's what we're doing. We're answering this question, why embroidery? And of course, I had a really early answer when I first posted this up. A good friend of mine, Carolyn Cale, said, because it is art, because the work is not just thread, because it is not just reproduction, it's art. And I'll go ahead and second that and say, yes, I really do believe in the particular aesthetic value of embroidery as being something unique and wonderful and worthy of praise in and of itself. Obviously, I wouldn't have dedicated this much of my life to it if I didn't. But I also know that there are different kinds of ways we come about generating value or explaining value to people. So part of what I'm going to do is something you've probably heard about before. If you heard me talk about value or pricing, you've had me explain to you the difference between kind of utilitarian value and perceived value. But I'm going to hit that again because I think it's really useful to everything we do when we are, heck, it doesn't have to be about selling things, but it often is. And in valuing what we do in particular, I think it's worthwhile to talk about it. So I'm going to start with some of the slides from the presentation that I provided. This is something that I did at Shirt Lab a couple years ago. It's not this last Shirt Lab, the Shirt Lab before. So out there in Fort Worth, Texas, when we were doing that Shirt Lab event, I presented to a room full of, very esteemed decorators, these concepts, and a lot of them kind of pulled away from this saying, wow, I didn't really think of embroidery that way. But I think honestly, it speaks to more than embroidery. We'll start from that general place, but then we're really going to get into what those unique value propositions of embroidery are. And like I said, it may be nothing new if you followed me for years, but I still think it's always worth reminding ourselves of this stuff, because there are times where we can be reactive versus proactive, and I'm going to discuss that. And we can be reacting to client woes or things that they want without being proactive in how we share with them. In fact, let's go ahead and start with a little bit of that. Then I'll get into proactive and reactive kind of stances, and I think where we're at with this stuff. But I do think that establishing what value means to us is worthwhile. And this is kind of what I presented is that I want people to break through this concept of the thousands. And what do I mean by that? If you're somebody from the old school who has been in the commercial world for some time, you know that embroidery generally ends up getting priced by contract in the thousands, where it's like, how many thousand stitches is worth how much? Here's the deal. Though that is useful, though there is room for contract embroidery, and I'm never going to say there's a problem with that, contract embroiderers are a vital part of our industry and need to be there. A lot of the people I talk to on a daily basis really fit more into the mold of either full custom embroidery that usually has some method of consulting involved. It has some work done in design work or concept. It has something more to it that deals with that curation of type stitch types and work that can be done for interpretation and materials, so we're knowing a lot about what's going on in such a way that we can provide consultation. And that's what I always tell people: you want to get more valuable than a commodity, then you want to be a consultant, not a commodity. You want to be able to provide solutions and be someone who can explain solutions. But that most of the people I talk to are already there. They are either doing some sort of consultation work, even if they're in kind of the custom embroidery space, there's design and consultation involved, or they are full on working in what I would consider boutique embroidery that is specific to a person, that is fully custom, that honestly has a lot of labor involved, that has nothing to do with how many thousand stitches they can push through a machine. So when we're talking about embroidery and how we're going to sell it and how we're going to price it as well, if we're talking about this in a commercial space, then embroidery, to my mind, you have to break through this concept of a dollar per thousand, and you need to think about the value you can provide. So in general, though, embroidery is best sold on the strengths of the medium and the versatility of its execution. And we're going to go through that. So the things that embroidery as a medium, stitching with thread, we have a physical medium that is very unique and has properties that only embroidery has. Those strengths are important. And the versatility of the execution, what we can do with embroidery that lets us do things that perhaps if print can do, it maybe is not as natural to it, or that there are some key differences that make embroidery particularly valuable. So some of the things we want to do when we're talking about this, we want to understand and cultivate its unique value. What do I mean by that? It's not just enough to know that embroidery is cool, to know that embroidery has something valuable to do with it, but we have to cultivate it. It means we have to use those values in creating solutions for our customers so that we can create something unique that only embroidery can do. We can provide solutions that only embroidery can provide, or that embroidery does very well, so that when we are selling or explaining what we do, we can bring to that a deeper understanding of embroidery and value that is not going to be represented by just any other medium, and especially other mediums that might have some benefits. As far as we know, embroidery is a little slower, a little more expensive. So honestly, we need to be able to combat that somewhat with our other unique values. And the second thing, always, and this is with anything we do, clear communication. So we have to be able to communicate and display these unique values to our customers. And last but not least, I'm not going to hammer on pricing today. However, if you are doing incredible one-off boutique work, if you are doing design work, if you are creating new assets for people, you have to price and position these things accordingly. You can't treat your work like a commodity decoration if you are doing custom boutique level labor. If you're doing that kind of work and bringing that kind of creativity, you need to find a way to be remunerated for that work. And you should position yourself and position your product in such a way that that's where it sits. That you're not competing with a commodity, you're competing with other custom boutique work in that space. I know people will say, my area won't tolerate a price like X. Honestly, most people I've talked to who say that have not made the big ask or asked for it or provided different tiers of value where you have less input or where you don't have quite that much of your creativity tied up in it, so that you can provide a value that is commensurate with what you're being paid. Sometimes it means tiering your pricing. Sometimes it means looking for different customers, because if we could do, this is the thing I always tell people, they say, all right, I'm going to lose customers. I'm like, all right, so let's say we double our prices and we lose half our customers. It means we make the same amount of money while we're doing half the labor. So we get back half that time. And what could we do with that time? It's not always that cut and dry, but it can be, and we don't know if we continually kind of race to the bottom, and I don't want us to do that. So let's first kind of go there. That's the first thing I want to just say is we're breaking through the thousands. We are trying to kind of get out of this mentality of, you know, dollar per thousand stitches, that's all we have to do. And the other thing, I'll go ahead and bring up some of these other things. I wasn't going to go through all the slides, but here are some other slides I just think are worthwhile going through. Number one, adding value does not equal adding input. You don't necessarily have to add more material costs or more labor to a piece in order to make it worth more to someone. Yes, we should be paid for when we add more labor and when we add more material value, but that's not the only way for something to be more valuable. You don't have to put more into something to make it work. And honestly, there are some times where it really doesn't make any sense to do that. But these are the things we really want to go to is we're going to talk about valuable. We're talking about measurable value and perceived value. Very briefly, I'll just define these quickly. These are the things that kind of break down the different kind of values people may see in a product in general. Measurable value is the easiest one to sell on, and it's the one that we always think about. It's where we say, all right, I want to get a more expensive garment. I want to put, if I have more stitches in it, if I have more locations on it, then obviously it's worth more. Based on labor and costs, it's easy to quantify. It's proved by calculation. It takes more input to raise measurable value. Something you have to do has to be literally be able to be pointed to and measured. It's a number and it's easy to quantify. Perceived value is the other half of this. It's the kind of value that your customer sees in your product or in what you do. Once again, based on perception, it's based on the way they see your product. It's super hard to quantify sometimes. It can be where is it located? What is it in relation to? Is someone using it that they find attractive, appealing, or trustworthy? It is proved by the response of the customer. The customer tells you what the perceived value is because they will be willing to tolerate a certain price for things. That's the value. And it's raised through things, like I said, like context. Where is it presented? How is it presented? Marketing. How well have you told the story of what it does? And what it's worth. Positioning. Where have you placed it in such, in the market, in a market that makes sense for that kind of money to be, thrown around, that kind of value. Popularity with a certain group of people. If something is popular or interesting, it can be worth more, even if materially it isn't worth any more. And the hard part about it is it's out of sync with labor and cost. So measurable value is comfortable for us to talk about, but perception is limitless. If someone perceives something to be of a higher value, as we know with really high-end brands, sometimes the actual material cost of what goes in or labor cost that goes into a high-end brand garment or a high-end brand product might not actually be that much more than a standard product. So before we go any further, that's just what I wanted to get to. Value is a little bit of a slippery thing. And so when we answer the question of why embroidery, I do want to talk about the specific nature of embroidery and why I think that it actually pushes these buttons that can increase perceived value with people if we sell it in the right way. And if we explain it in the right way, we can bring that value to the forefront. But it's worthwhile just to make sure we understand, hey, yeah, more stitches should cost more because we have to cover more literal input. However, it's not the only way. It's not the only way to get to the value. It's not the only way to increase the value. The value can also be increased by fitness for the customer's needs or by appealing to the way the customer feels about the particular product. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just briefly talk about these kind of two stances I think that we can take when we're discussing value or discussing why embroidery is important. In this case, it's proactive versus reactive. Well, we know proactive is where we get ahead of something, that we are acting toward the problem before it comes to us, whereas reactive is where we let it come to us. The thing is, a lot of these issues with value are reactive. Where do I see people kind of suffering on this one? Someone will come to them, the customer comes to them, asks for something that doesn't work particularly well with embroidery or with a particular technology they're using. This can also be, hey, sublimation, and the fact that it really only goes on light substrates or has color issues that you can't do an opaque, you can't do opaque white with with traditional sublimation is one of these too. It's one of these places where someone comes to you and asks for your material method, your way of decorating, to be used in something that doesn't work really well. Classic one for embroidery is super, super tiny text and detail that's highly packed in, or crazy gradients. And yes, color real exists, but there's some things that color real cannot do, or at least doesn't do very well because it doesn't solve every problem with gradients. And when we have a customer that's appealing to us with a way that embroidery doesn't really work, or a garment on which embroidery doesn't make a lot of sense, and they kind of complain because they're coming to you with that question, the reactive place is where we are. We kind of have to react to expectations that a customer has set without us. They've set an expectation of what they think the medium can do and should do, and we have to react to that. I'm not saying it's something that we can always avoid, but that's the reactive stance. If we don't educate a customer or communicate to them what makes sense for our medium, then the customer comes to us with their expectations already in, generally set by things like regular print, because they don't know all the arcane stuff we know about embroidery, and nor should they have to. They come to us for a reason. Otherwise, they could be doing it themselves. But when we're reactive, we let these situations occur and then we clean up the mess after. And this is where we get into the apologetics, right? This is where we're like, well, not apologetics, but we get into apologizing constantly. Apologetics is prefiguring problems and then formulating an argument ahead of time, which is a little proactive. However, in this case, when we're apologizing all the time for the fact that it doesn't do super tiny text, or the fact that the detail can't go in a certain way, or the fact that something else is going wrong with the piece, I mean, that's that is often the case that what we've done is let a customer set terms and we haven't provided the customer upfront, or at least we haven't reacted fast enough. We've gotten too far down the pike with our decoration style that's not going to work for what they want. And especially if we're people who have a solo shop, we've got, say, just embroidery in house, we're not doing any sort of print, and maybe we're not comfortable with outsourcing yet, or vice versa. I know people coming into embroidery from print where they're really familiar with the print format and they don't kind of know everything about embroidery's technical limitations, and when they first start they end up in this reactive place pretty frequently because they kind of expect a thing that embroidery may or may not be good for. Rather than putting embroidery in that place and then apologizing for it once it doesn't fulfill the needs that it doesn't suit, I think the best option for all of us is to work toward being more proactive. And in this case, that is, like I said earlier, to know what embroidery strengths are and to serve those up. When someone comes in needing something, when they want a garment, we talk to them about what they need, about the qualities they're looking for, about what they're trying to communicate to whoever is looking at the garment. Because obviously, if we're putting a decoration on something, we're trying to show it to somebody. Even if it's something for ourselves, we have a quality we're looking for. But truthfully, most of the stuff we're doing, we are trying to express something to somebody. And we know the unique qualities of embroidery that make that happen. And we know the technical nature of embroidery so that we can recommend the right way to execute. But we have to be proactive. When a customer comes to us, we should be the ones making proactive suggestions and suggesting solutions that put the strengths of embroidery up front. So that's the thing. It's about apologizing versus showing strengths. We shouldn't have to apologize for embroidery. Embroidery is what it is by its nature. It does what it does. The machines do what they do. We can make happen what can make happen. And that's the best way for embroidery. And I know you guys have heard me say this phrase before, but I'm going to arm you with it again. If you're someone who hasn't said it before, then you are welcome for this little gift. When I had a customer come to me and I started to discuss alterations that have to be made to a logo, as an in-house digitizer, I did this very frequently. I would say, if this were my logo, if this were my brand that I love, that is important to me, that represents my company, my group, my team, my church, my whatever it is, my community club, whatever it is, if it were my logo that was important to me, this is what I would do to make it look its best as an embroidered design. This is what I would do to allow it to be the best embroidery it can be. That's the best way to come at these suggestions. Say, I want to make for you the best embroidered result, not the most fidelity to your artwork without questioning what it's going on, but the best embroidered result. And the best thing I can do is X, is this solution that plays to the strengths of embroidery. Rather than apologizing for what it can't do, explain all the great things it can do, and know how to showcase embroidery in such a way that you can present something that, and also that you can show these things. That's why I think samples and self-directed projects are so important for digitizers just starting out and embroiders just starting out. Making shop floor samples or showroom type samples, even if it's something that you're totally online, just having images of types of execution, of types of embroidery, of types of materials you might use, multimedia, whatever it is you're into, whatever it is you're capable of doing, showing some best use cases for the type of work you can do, and explaining to them what things can and can't do, what they look like, and what you think the best example, the best ability you have to represent their art in stitches is, but one that suits the medium. So showing strengths is important. Now, to use some terms that are kind of hackneyed, I hate to say that they kind of have worn out on me a little bit. UVP, USP, what this usually is like unique value proposition or unique selling proposition. The unique value proposition is essentially what makes embroidery, what makes your shop, what makes your work uniquely suited to serve someone. The thing is, it might not be reactive. As reactive, we're waiting for somebody to come to them and then making an argument for it after the fact. But when we are selling, when we're presenting ourselves, we should know ahead of time what it is about working with us, working with embroidery, since we're being specific about the medium today as well, that is useful to them, that is valuable to them, and that can provide results for them or honestly make them happier. And if you want to blow it out of proportion a little bit, this is what I often say, even though it sounds like it's out of proportion. What about working with embroidery and working with us can make their life better? Yes, I know that sounds crazy. That's a little bit extra. But what about it? What about us uniquely provides a value that they're not likely to find somewhere else, or that you think is worthwhile as a proposition for them to tip, for them to make the sale, for them to be there? The other way it was put to me, I went to a ThreadX conference and one of the speakers said it was the HSF. I will be clean and keep the child-friendly tag on this video and say it's the holy stuff factor. That is not what he said. So I'll be nice and not use the word, but hey, I would if we were sitting privately after the trade show in the bar. But it's the fact that makes you say, wow, that is awesome. That is unique. That is something that person has that makes me pause and say, holy stuff. In person, I'd be a lot more salty than this, but hey, folks, I'm trying to be good. Suffice it to say, that's your unique value proposition. That's the thing you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to get at. And I actually have a couple of things to bring up on that. It's something that I brought up in when I was doing that presentation in Fort Worth. And this is it: is the tough questions. These are the 3 tough questions I'd like you to ask, and I'm gonna go back over them one more time. But these are those questions. Number 1, what problems can my work uniquely solve? So this is not unique to embroidery, but I think that we will get to a point here in a minute where we talk about what embroidery does that will solve this stuff. So why not something else? What can the work that I do uniquely solve? And it could be about your work, it could be about your shop, it could be about the way you provide work as well as embroidery. But that's it. That's one of the things. A little more utilitarian, but that's a good way to do it. And certainly this is more about the medium. This is more about embroidery. This is more about, or if you were doing print or sublimation or something else, what is it unique about that it can solve certain problems? And you should know these things. These are things you know up front. When people talk about your elevator pitch, it's not just about your elevator pitch. It's about what you would say to someone if you were put on the spot. And these questions are good to answer. What problems can my work uniquely solve? The method, the medium that I'm working in, the type of thing I do, the methods that I employ. So what does embroidery do for you? Why embroidery? Certainly. But secondly, what about my work's delights and surprises? And I know this sounds crazy, but when you think about the things that drive people, I'm actually going to bring this up later. I even made a Venn diagram. So I guess here we go with me being dorky and putting diagrams up. But hey, what about my work delights and surprises? One of the things we sell on, and especially if you're in a market where you do gifts, gifts, especially if you're doing gifts, whether they're corporate or not, one of the things that drives gift buying is novelty. If you think about all the cutesy stuff, and one of the things I remember from early on in my career is when people started doing the embroidered toilet paper, and you may have not have heard of it if you're not in the home space, but in the home space, it's been around forever. I've seen commercial shops do it too. You lay in some stabilizer behind a couple sheets of toilet paper and stick it down, and then you embroider something and then roll it back up and wrap it up. And it was often left for home gifts. And it was novel because the concept of embroidering toilet paper, something that was incredibly uh, absolutely necessary to throw away and shouldn't be fancy, getting the treatment of embroidery was funny, was novel, and it made people stop in their tracks. So novelty drives a lot of sales too. So what about my work delights and surprises? Now it doesn't have to be that. The gradients that people are doing at color reel right now, this is part of what makes them impressive, is because they delight and surprise. They don't look like everything else. The work people have done with textured 3D foam, when we were used to seeing smooth columns of 3D foam, the first people who were doing textured 3D foam where they're dropping motifs on it or carving up their 3D satins into multiple satin chunks. They made something that was surprising. That texture was surprising and interesting and stood out. It delights and surprises. There's other reasons why you can delight and surprise, but it's something to think about: novelty and delight. So, what can I do to make them smile? And third, what can my shop? So, if we're talking about embroidery at first, and then we're talking about novelty, thirdly, what do you bring as a particular group of people or a person to the process? What is it that you know, that you do, that you change, that your experience provides to that customer that is different? What about your shop, your process? What do you bring to the table that no one else can bring? I know some people say, well, everybody has something, I can do whatever. It can be as simple as your personality and working with you. That can be part of what is the value proposition of working with you. I know that's not why embroidery, and we'll get back to why embroidery, but that can be part of what it is. What makes it uniquely valuable to work with you instead of someone else? And I think these are all useful. Like I said, unique value proposition is a little is a little rough. It feels kind of corporate, and it seems like everybody has said it a million times. But it was really about just asking those tough questions. Why? What makes it make more sense than something else? If you can't answer that question, I think that you're going to have a hard time justifying what you charge, justifying why you're the right choice, and selling to people, providing marketing. And you have to get to a point where you can see the utility and the aesthetic value and the novelty in what you do, and that you cultivate it. You cultivate those values in your work. And funny enough, I also think about this. It kind of reminded me of a term. It's a Japanese term that I may actually pronounce incorrectly, and I apologize ahead of time if I have. But it's talking about kind of the what makes life worth living, and in your work, what makes your work purposeful. And like I said, if I mispronounce it, please feel free to correct me. But the term is ikigai, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure I've said it incorrectly, but kind of the Western interpretation I've seen of this are these four kind of questions. And this is where we find that we as people fit the best, is where we're kind of fitting into these four questions. And that's this: what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you be paid for? If you find that center mark of that Venn diagram of these four questions, that's ikigai, right? That's where you are at the place you fit the best. You can provide for yourself. You are providing a service to the world around you, to the people around you. You are doing something that you are uniquely good at, or that you're qualified for, that you have a unique spin on, and something that you love. And that's going to make you get up day in and day out. And I think there's something very similar for tipping someone on decoration and giving them a chance to kind of see that value. And so the value of decoration, once again, I said it and I meant it. I'm going to be a nerd here, and I'm going to bring up my own my own Venn diagram that I put together for this. Uh, so for any particular kind of decoration, what is going to provide the most value? What's that nexus that is going to make people tip and make them interested in what we're doing? And here are the three kind of sections that I'm going to put this under. And we'll talk about these again as I go deeper into what embroidery is good for and why embroidery. Um, First, aesthetics. Does it look good? Of course, you have to be technically competent so it looks good and so it is an attractive thing you're providing. You can make an attractive rendition of ugly designs. If you haven't seen me talk about the Sloppy Joe bowling design, seriously, look up my name and Sloppy Joe and you'll see it. I lovingly rendered an ugly Sloppy Joe sandwich that was angrily chasing some bowling pins. It's the ugliest thing, and I was very careful to make the embroidery as nice as I could. Aesthetics can be there without the thing being beautiful in and of itself. Even if the art that someone provides you for custom embroidery is ugly, you can still provide something that's aesthetically pleasing. So aesthetics are a big part of it, and that's usually what people think about when they worry about how we digitize or what we do is aesthetically, does it work? But there's a lot more than that to it. There's utility. So when we talk about utility, embroidery has particular utility because of the material itself, and we'll talk about that. You know, the durability of it, how it can be used. Also, there's utility in the way we're presenting it. Does it actually provide a value or a function? It helps somebody identify your business. Does it identify the person who's wearing the garment? Does it identify where they are from? Does it help you to provide impressions for self promotion or work promotion of some kind? Is it something that provides a sense of belonging to the people who are wearing it, and that is valuable to them, and team building? There is actual utility, and they can also be functional utility to the garments we sell. Does it literally have functions that help people? Does it keep the rain off you? Does it keep you warm? Does it cover you up and keep you from out of the sun? And is it strong enough to hold up to the kind of work you do? Does it, if you're a contractor, does that embroidery hold up or not when you scrape against something? And that's something we actually plan for and digitize toward. And of course, the third one I've already talked about all before we got here was novelty and delight. Um, does this thing have some novelty, or is it delightful? Does it surprise people, either in the artistic sense of what's being presented or in how we employ embroidery? Does somebody say, hey, that's cool, that looks neat, I want to show someone else this piece? It's something new, it's something interesting, or it's something delightful. Hey, look at that, look at the details that were achieved, look at how the thread looks, check out this cool new multimedia, what is that from, look at these interesting gradient that's on it. Is this something that is novel, maybe something they haven't seen, or something that is delightful, that either is surprising or funny or presents something interesting they would want to show someone else so that they could kind of be the curator of the cool, right? So that's the thing. We have this central area where, in the middle of making sure it's aesthetically pleasing, that it represents the art it's supposed to, especially in the land of custom embroidery, that it has utility, it has a function, it is providing, it's providing the needs that they are trying to meet, whether it's promotional or if it's self-identification, whatever that is, whatever that expression is. And novelty and delight, is there something novel, interesting, something that catches the spirit of the moment, if it's something that's trendy, trending. Uh, when we are at the center of that, we have a kind of value that's hard to beat, and it increases the perception of value so that when we get down to the nitty gritty and we want to price something, our prices go higher and we don't have to justify. And what I'm going to then do is we'll transition from here into the unique qualities of embroidery itself and say, hey, where do we find this nexus? And by the way, defining this nexus is going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different for every customer. That nexus is not going to be the same for every single customer you're at. They're not going to find the same value, the same utility, or the same aesthetically pleasing sense, or the same novelty in every single kind of decoration. This isn't going to be a one-stop shop where you figure this out and every client ever loves everything. There are things that I've done, even things that are very well received. Like, you guys know I talk about dimensional carving. I'm going to even talk about it in the context of embroidery here, where I will tend to break up big fields of embroidery by using multiple different shapes with different stitch angles and contrast in order to create something that's more attractive, that has a little bit of play of light over a surface. Almost everyone I've ever showed it to loves it. But I can count on one hand the customers who didn't like it, where I took something like a silhouette logo that they presented me, and I carved apart, like, let's say it was a silhouette of a person. It wasn't always. I had the arms separate, and the face, and the garments, and the hat, and the feet, and the pants in separate different types of stitch types and stitch angles, so that it looked like a carved sculpture. Almost everyone I've ever done this for has liked it and found novelty in it and was impressed by the little details and wanted to show everybody. But I still have, even with it being that popular over the course of my entire career, I still have about 5, 6 people I could say, for sure I can remember like 3 or 4 off the top of my head, where they were like, "Okay, I don't like this. Go back to the flat version. I want a flat fill with no texture. I was trying to do something flat and you've made it different." It's not always going to apply to everybody. However, if you understand what the things that are interesting about embroidery are, you have a chance to bring that to bear. And for me, I won tons of clients over because of that work. Not everybody, but the thing is, I can go back and present flat embroidery. I can go back and present a less refined version of something, or something where I don't reach further into an artistic expression anytime. That's easy to do. I can present what everybody else is presenting, or what I perceive to be the standard. But if I don't ever reach beyond that or try and go to that place where I cultivate the unique properties of embroidery, I can't get anywhere beyond it. It's like we can always fall back to the old standard, but reaching beyond it and trying to make something interesting that is unique to embroidery, we can't always do, once we've kind of or we can't do unless we're willing to cultivate it and understand it. But let's stop for a second for comments before I jump further in. We've got a couple of good comments here, so let's go ahead and grab that as we go through. Uh, Certainly, we have, this is a good one from Sally. Sally says, "I'm all for losing the wrong kind of customer." Yeah, like I said, if you lose half your customers but make the same amount of money, good for you. Good for you. Because then we can look for more of the type of customers that are making us double the money and bring those in. So I think that's useful. Nikki says, hi. Hi, Nikki. Happy to have you in. Joanne's late, but happy to be there. Happy to see you, Joanne. Don't know who you are, Facebook user. You haven't signed in for it, but we'll just go ahead and bring that in. And you have a good comment anyhow. Each facet of decoration brings its own strengths and weaknesses. The customer has but one perspective. We as the decorators must understand that and yet show them what can be achieved by using different mediums. 100%. You win. I wish I had your name there so I could say it was impressive. But trust me, yeah, absolutely. Joanne says you need to write a book titled "How to Succeed in Embroidery Business." I've probably written it 5 times in different articles, but maybe someday, right? All right, and that's Joanne says, I was sent the ugliest fabric once. I had to find a way to make it look good for a trade show display. Quite the challenge. It can be, but that's the thing. We can always find a way to present it in its best way if we think about it. And Woody says, only a few months into embroidery, not so much to offer in this conversation, but I do have a question on the subject. Okay, we can stop for a question. I'll pop up over the comment here in a second. A printed hoodie I can sell for 50, but the same logo embroidered is 80 plus. Is there anything more about embroidery than thread sheen and durability that justifies that much of a price difference? Yeah, I think there is because part of it is the luxury appearance and apparel. That durability is a big part of it, absolutely, and that's something that I usually teach. But I think that's the thing. It's okay for the customer to decide they want print instead. Most of the time, the thing is, I know thread sheen, it seems like the only thing you can do, but it's also a possibility for you to look at things like multimedia, to look at things like adding applique, to using materials that just can't be gotten in other ways. Yes, there are other kinds of printing to be had out there, but part of the deal is when we see embroidery and only do the standard where it's like polyester thread only, we're only using one kind of thread, we're only using one thickness thread, we only ever do one type of digitizing where it's, the textures are very similar, where it's kind of the coloring book style of digitizing. It's a little bit harder to sell because that's very standard. But you're right. It is sometimes harder to justify that difference. But I think the thing is we have to associate it with luxury. We also have to look at coordinating. So we're not just replicating prints. We're doing something unique with the embroidery that really can't be done. So it's not just thread sheen. It's also the execution of how you break logos apart, how you interpret, how you bring in textures, and then how you use things like multimedia, like other types of, like I said, like other types of execution that you can bring together and other types of materials that you can create looks that aren't the same. Because here's the thing. Yeah, we can talk about thread sheen and texture, and I think that is really key to this. And I think there's certainly something to be said for the fact that you just literally can tell them, hey, embroidery is perceived as a luxury item. You don't go to a high-end golf shop and see them, or at least back in the day, you never saw somebody with a high-end polo shirt with a left chest on it at a high-end golf shop that was not going to be embroidered. You weren't going to see a screen print or a transfer on that. A plasticky looking transfer is not high end. It does not look luxury. The gold standard for luxury has been embroidery for a very long time. Yes, there are other things that are out there. I think that some of the dimensional transfers and stuff out there now are very interesting, but the gold standard for luxury is embroidery, and I think we know that. The other thing is, unless you're just talking about, you're doing heat printing, you're doing printing where it's one piece at a time. The other thing is that we can do things like, which I'm going to talk about in execution later. We can do things like personalization at a scale with embroidery that makes more sense. Embroidery is a standard and highly sought after for individual personalization. And on top of that, we can add all of these unique characteristics. So, and here's the thing: does it justify that price difference? Yeah, it justifies the price difference. I think that honestly, we know that that price difference is the norm in the first place. And if we position it as the luxury side of it, then yeah. But the other thing I will say is, frequently, you also want to make a break when there is the same kind of garment. I usually want to use a higher end garment embroidered than I do for print. I want to make a separation so that break makes a little more sense. If somebody's looking for a higher end look, if they're looking for texture, then embroidery is the standard. If we are selling it as the same logo at the same size, executed in the same way, one's thread, one's print, we're going to have a problem there. We have to make a little bit of separation there for ourselves. So like I said, you can say that that's the only difference is the sheen and durability. But for me, it's not just sheen and durability because we can execute in a way that shows dimension and makes things more sculptural and embroidery that can't really be done with print, not even puff print. Certainly there are things that have dimension, and like I said, some of the new molded kind of heat press materials, some of the stuff that's coming out that has more dimension put into it. Yes, there's dye fees and everything else that can go along with that. Those are interesting and maybe have something in the running to be more similar to that kind of setup. But in general, with embroidery, we can do more customization. We can provide not just a textural difference that's just about sheen. It is about the entire three-dimensionality of the piece. And like I said, I really think the thing is we have to present it as the luxury option. We'll say, if you want the higher end look, if you want the custom look, and we should compare it and put it in the context of other high-end apparel. If we look at other high-end apparel and we talk about the difference between fashion, high-end apparel, or streetwear, or anything in that sphere, where we talk about the difference between print and embroidery, we can see that for certain categories, especially like outerwear, especially you're talking about, doing a sweatshirt, you're doing a hoodie. If we go with a high-end hoodie with certain kinds of graphics, certain types of layouts, embroidery is the choice, embroidery is the standard. And we can also go further with the kinds of textures we can produce. And I'd certainly say I would look beyond the standard thread choices, the standard types of embroidery and the coloring book type execution into something that has more texture to it to sell a unique value. If we just represent the same art the same way in every medium, it gets harder to separate these things out. And it's also why when I talk about design, it's often about not slapping the same logo in the same place in the same method over and over again. It's about making coordinated looks. And I think the embroidered look is one of the places where we can start to deviate a little bit and we can make packages, we can make coordinated looks based on the garment we're working on, based on the type of look we're looking for. And we can style even the same art in different ways depending on our materials. We can style an embroidered piece vintage by using spun polyester or wool blend threads. We can style something differently by using more texture or by stitching differently, digitizing differently than we necessarily could with print. And we can do more individual customization. I think it's just natural in the space of embroidery. So it probably doesn't answer all your questions, and I probably added more, but I think that that's the thing. We can't look at them as the same thing, and I don't think it makes sense to try and slap exactly the same representation in every place. But even when you do, it's easy to, and I think proper to lean on the fact that embroidery is a more luxury item. If they come to the fight with, I can get it cheaper as print, awesome. Get into the business of print and say that's an option that works for you. We can make print happen if that's the way we want to do it. If they want the high end look, offer the high end look and make it make sense. And here's the other thing I'm going to say for in the promotional space. If you want a customer to look at a garment as high end, yes, the buyer might want to save money on the individual look, but for that customer, the only impression or the only thing that matters is impressions in this case for a lot of people. If you want a customer to associate your brand with something that is both high end that they want to wear, having something that looks nice, that looks high end, that is a styled version instead of just a logo slap, is more likely to have them wear it and associate it with that quality. And honestly, having a quality garment itself with a higher quality decoration is going to give you that association. So hopefully that makes like a little bit more sense out of it. I'll admit there are some people who just say I'd rather get it printed, and there are times where I have flatly just said, all right, if you want to transfer on a hat, I will do it. But people are going to look at that like a giveaway, like a throwaway. If you give somebody something embroidered, it has a different weight to it. And the other thing is to say there are times when the print is the right call. And when people are always surprised when I come to that as an embroiderer, as somebody who's been, and I make this joke all the time, I don't mean to, without any pun involved, dyed in the wool commercial embroiderer, they're always saying, really, you're going to tell me sometimes you'll choose print. And there are times where print absolutely makes the most sense. But there are some garments and categories where you would never catch me running print. And it's also the same thing when I talk about quality and we're saying like in the promotional product space, um, never buy a cheap pen and put your logo on it, because even if you don't do anything that has to do with pens in your entire life of your business, if your business provides someone a cheap pen that doesn't write when they need to write something, they'll curse your name for it and they will associate you with the cheapness. And when we're selling to our customers, we can tell them, if you want to be perceived as someone who's given a gift instead of handed you a garment that's a throwaway for you to be their billboard, high quality garment, high quality decoration is going to be the way to get that luxury going. So there you go. and you're welcome for the answer. I'm going to tell you, there are customers who are going to say this though. There are customers who are going to be like, I'll just take the print. cool. Get into the business of print, or sub that print out to somebody else who does print, and that's totally fine. Offer your good, better, best solutions and give them something luxury to go from. All right, so let's see. Sally says, I totally agree. I've stitched the same design on a cheap t-shirt and a high quality t-shirt to show the customer they really notice the difference in quality and prepared to pay the extra for it. Absolutely. And here's the other thing. I know we talked about firing customers to a degree or losing customers. If you have a customer and their only consideration is always the bargain basement pricing, if they hunt back and forth and go between your shop and another shop every time someone discounts, that's not your best customer, and they will always do it. They're always going to go to the person who's got the discount. That customer is not a customer worth chasing. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, yeah, I'm not going to worry about that customer too much. Yes, we do have to make money. Yes, when the cash flow is rough, we have to make sure we're getting that cash flow in. Part of that is knowing what we can and can't do, knowing what makes sense at price points, and offering the proper solution for the proper price that fits the needs of the customer the best it can. Sometimes embroidery isn't it. Sometimes heat press is the way. And in fact, with embroidery only shops, the very first thing I tell people to expand into, if you don't have a heat press, you should. If you don't have a heat press and a cutter, or just a heat press allows you to purchase transfers, whether it's DTF, whether it's rhinestones, you want to go there, if it's flocking, if it's the new kind of like I said earlier, the dimensional stuff that's coming out of a lot of the shops. I mean, Stalls is doing it. Pen Emblem has done it for a while. In Europe, there's several places. World Emblem does them. Those kind of textured prints, whatever it is you want to do in the world of printing, there's probably a heat print version of it. Yes, it might not be as cheap as a large run of screen print, but it allows you to really diversify and then get into multimedia, which is something super unique for embroidery. The ability to add a textural piece onto a printed surface, super awesome, and provides a lot of value with not necessarily the kind of work people might think to get the coverage. So, like I said, good stuff. But let's go ahead and go quickly through some actual. I want to go to some of the qualities of embroidery because I know I'm trying to make this a little bit shorter than my usual shows. I'm probably still going to go another another chunk of time as I often do. But let's go through some of the actual value propositions for embroidery itself, and I think it'd be valuable just to kind of hit those real quick and just get to these unique properties of embroidery to allow us to kind of formulate that sale a little bit, or formulate our means for that. So here are the kinds of things that I think are of as the unique values of embroidery, right? So let's talk about the unique values of embroidery and kind of explain them to some degree. If we want to spend some more time, if I can hold up my energy level, I might go into a little more depth on these. But let's go through the list first and just kind of explain them. There's three kinds of categories of value. So you'll see these two different these two here, and we've got one more after that. So we have our aesthetic, utilitarian, and application. But let's go ahead and go over them like this now. Number one, aesthetics. The dimensionality of embroidery, the fact that it really is more like a relief sculpture. It stands up from the garment and there is shine and shadow on it. So that happens to be part of the surface quality, but it's also just the dimensionality. We literally provide a physical object. We're using thread to create something physical that has a texture, that has a shadow to it, and it has a dimension that we can see. So dimensionality is part of it. Prints traditionally don't have a lot of dimension. Yes, there can be three-dimensional prints, puff prints, other types of prints, but traditionally when we're kind of competing against print, dimensionality is the first thing that makes embroidery kind of interesting. So surface quality absolutely is a thing. Luster and sheen, depending on the kind of thread we're using, standard embroidery thread tends to be shiny. We now have great options for matte finish threads as well that have really solid color representation and really good, honestly, some utility. They have UV fastness, so light fastness, and bleach fastness, but we have that kind of luster and sheen. And there's a tactile appeal, right? Never forget that these are going on human beings who are touching them. Embroidery is a touchable thing. If you make light, well digitized embroidery that doesn't go overly dense, embroidery can be very tactile. It can flow decently with the garment if you don't use too much stabilizer, you don't hit it with too much density, and it can be interesting to the touch. And I know that's something that's not part of promotion, but when we're talking about, let's say, a garment that someone's supposed to buy for themselves, the tactile appeal of embroidery and feeling that raised surface, it's like embossed packaging. It has an appeal to it as a tactile object. So that's something to think about as a difference. And in fact, that's a good kind of comparison to make when people are talking about the quality representation of embroidery versus print. If you talk to them about packaging and say, all right, what's the difference between an embossed printed package and a printed package? And when there's embossing or when there are textures involved that feel nice, that work well, doesn't that add something to the sense of quality and the sense of being luxury or high end? And I think it does. So tactile appeal is part of it. Material variability, without changing a lot about how we put the embroidery together, without having to change what we do in digitizing, without having to change equipment, I can create a very different expression of embroidery with the material. And this also extends out into things like applique. I can use different thread with the same design and create very different looks without doing a lot on the back end for the design. I always recommend doing things with the design that changes them and themes them. However, I can go from a very shiny, very high edged, kind of lustrous design done entirely in polyester or in rayon. Um, and rayon actually has a different warmth than polyester. So those two are actually a little bit different. But then I can go into spun polyester without changing a lot about my design. And honestly, depending on the way the design is digitized, maybe without even changing it at all, and run something that looks rough and vintage and a little bit softer and warmer without much difference, and definitely without adding any other sort of equipment or any other sort of process. So there's a material variability. Same thing with applique. We can use the very same design and different colored, different printed, different textured appliques to create on one multi-head machine multiple different looks. It's not something you're going to do all the time, but it's something that's possible. And it's something that we can do very kind of fairly simply. It's not really that difficult to make that happen. Multimedia potential, like I said, with the applique in general, but multimedia is something that's natural to embroidery too. You can embroider on print with very little problems, and you can do things like sublimate onto polyester thread. There's multimedia potential. Now, certainly, these things are available in print. However, because we have all this other dimensionality, service quality, and other things that are interesting, we get to add the strengths of print to our own. So, like the Borg, resistance is futile. We will use your strengths to enforce our own. We will take the uniqueness of print and add embroidery to it and get texture and print together and provide something that's very interesting. And then creative execution, because embroidery by its very nature is an interpretive act. We are taking a printed or flat piece of art or a digital piece of art, and we are making from it a physical object that is created with thousands of stitches of little threads. We can make something different. It is interpretive by its very nature. We can vary stitch angles, we can vary the way we break apart objects in order to create something that has an interesting texture, an interesting execution that is unique to the embroidery. That provides this dimensional quality that when the light passes over a piece that has been done with different stitch angles and textures, that it looks like a physical object in space, that it is like a faceted gem. It reflects the light differently as the light passes over it. And on a curved body, which is what it's going to be on a human body, that means almost always that light is going to pass over in an interesting way. And I think that's, that is something that's really interesting. And like Daryl says here, I like the idea of changing direction of stitching. I wish I had digitized and understood this. Yeah, that's something that is interesting. It's important to have a digitizer who kind of gets that stuff, and showing them examples of it is one of the best things you can do. You find an example, show it to them. I mean, you find an example of somebody else doing that work, explain it, show it to them. It's surprising how much is just about communication, but can also be that you need another digitizer for sure. That can be a digitizer problem too. Um, let's get into the utilitarian value here. Absolutely durability. As long as the thread will last, especially if it is not being used in such a way where it's going to be abraded, cut, or hooked too much. And we can actually combat that with digitizing in such a way not to leave long loops. It is incredibly durable. It's going to be durable through the life of the garment. And in fact, to the point that I have certainly, I've certainly kind of sold it on that place. One of the times that was kind of interesting to me, I ended up doing a bunch of outdoor stuff. I ended up doing tire covers for a person who had a bunch of tire covers printed for their company, and they were tired of the New Mexico sun destroying all the prints on the tire covers. The prints were fading and cracking and looking terrible. And we did jacket back size designs for custom tire covers for a guy who's doing custom cars, custom Jeep work. And we put those out, and we used a very light, fast thread. We used a polyester. And I think toward the end, we were using matte finish polyester that held up to a lot of sun damage. And it absolutely was a increase in durability that was worthwhile to him. He used durable materials, we used durable thread, and as long as that thing didn't get shredded, it was not likely to fall apart and it wasn't going to bleed or move out of any sort of position or crack or peel or do anything like that. So that's interesting. Durability, material selection, like I said, we can select thread that has different qualities. We can select thread for industrial washing. We can select thread for bleach and make sure they can hold up to that. And we can select for UV and abrasion to some degree. And our digitizing can be made to make things more durable. Like I said, we avoid long loops and we make sure that we have something sitting close to the surface of the garment and with lots of nice underlay to keep any color show through from happening. Use specific safety materials. Now, I'm not going to speak to print having any impact on this, but it just is the case that we can get fire resistant or flame resistant type materials that can be used for people who need that. So there are materials to allow us to do that. There are also some things like reflective embroidery thread and or, which I think is a little less because it's expensive and hard to deal with, and or reflective applique materials, which I think are a little bit more useful. But we can create with our embroidery use specific actual utility to a job, things that make you more visible, things that make you safer. So those are the utilitarian kind of values of embroidery that are unique. We can get real retroreflective material on quite easily, and we don't have to set up kind of the harsher and maybe less effective process of adding reflective beads to a print, which is something else that can be done, but it's something you have to work on. Certainly heat print can provide you with reflective stuff, but sewing on the real true retro reflective materials that have that high shine is really the gold standard for me for making reflective gear. Also versatility, it just allows for lots of different appeal, lots of different applications, which all have their own appeal, actually. And we can do things like patch making. I harp on patch making, but patch making can be used as just an extension of your decoration. Even if you're never selling patches themselves, you can absolutely use patches to decorate things that are hard to stitch directly on. And that versatility means that we can decorate things that are for other people to decorate if we are willing to adhere something to them. I mean, that's sometimes what it happens. Why did I start making patches? The very first patches I made were made so that I could decorate on golf bags that could not be taken apart and were fused to a plastic shell. You couldn't put them on a machine. They did not have zip off pockets. They didn't have an area you could hoop, but they wanted embroidered monogrammed patches to go on those. And I made something that looked like it was stitched on, but wasn't. It was adhered to it. So the versatility that embroidery provides, like I said, patches being a proponent, or I'm a proponent of using patches for this, is something else that is in the utilitarian camp. And then when we go beyond that, let's go to the third category here, application. What's great about embroidery and application, and this is kind of where we fit as far as decoration for different jobs. It's suited to both mass production and individual personalization. If we're in a large multi-head shop situation, we can do mass production on a decent scale, and we can provide thousands and thousands of pieces, and we can also hire that out. But most embroidery shops, especially if you're in that kind of small to medium place, often will have a mixture of single head operation and multi-head, or will be adept at using multi-head embroidery machines to do personalization and kind of making that make the most sense. It is very sensible and fairly simple for us as embroiderers, because things stitch in a sequence, to add a name or a personalization to the end of a sequence and turn heads on and off on a multi-head machine, or to swap over to single head gear, even if we're using multi-head, in order to provide individual personalization. The very first thing I ever thought about embroidery, the very first thing that ever kind of I saw as embroidery as a kid, was the classic kind of mechanic shirt with the name patch on the side. Uniforming is one of those basic embroidery things that we often do, and the single individual name or the name and department has been a staple of embroidery from the very first embroiderers who were doing this commercially. So personalization is a big deal, and in a time where people are uh, kind of lionizing the ability of digital print to allow us to personalize things individually, we've had methods to personalize things individually, even though they might be a little slower, for a very long time. So when that becomes a thing, the concept of individual personalization, we can actually do that at a rate that's a little easier than some printers can, or at least that some printers traditionally could. Um, Digital printers come along and absolutely do that very well. And in fact, mixing the two makes us very interesting as people able to do this concept. So those concepts are there. Also fits into almost any market segment. If you can find a market segment where a decorated apparel piece goes, there is a piece of embroidery for it. And I think about all the different segments of people that I've helped over the years, from all the way from, like I said, the craft table. So people who are selling holiday craft table stuff, to monogrammers, where their entire business is in monogramming and personalizing gear. So all they do is single color monogram work and names, to uniforming. So they're doing maybe patchwork, some logo work. They're doing names on a lot of stuff. Often it's being done in 2 stages, up to commercial apparel. So we're doing commercial apparel like the stuff that I did: left chest logos, right chest names, jacket backs, sleeves, and hats all day long. That's a real normal thing. That is that business to business apparel. And then out to fashion work. So we're doing fashion work, home decor. You're making, heck, I've done tons of shower curtains for high-end places. Believe it or not, was one of the big ones I did. I've done a fair amount of home decor, but we can do decor. We can do streetwear. We can do fashion wear. We can do anything along there. One of the biggest consumers of machine embroidery in the States is Victoria's Secret, because they use a ton of it to make machine embroidered laces for lingerie. Machine embroidery belongs everywhere. If there's a segment, there's embroidery for it. And if we can learn how to do it, most of that embroidery, not all, most of that embroidery is done on the same style machines with the same software to program it. So it fits into almost every market segment, and it means that we have access. Once we have that embroidery machine in hand, it's up to our knowledge and our ability to leverage the materials and the style to get into that market segment and make it make sense. And the next thing about it, it's traditional and it's trending. Embroidery is for every category of decoration. You will see embroidery on the most old school, like I said, the most old school fine monogrammed work, on bridal stuff, on things that have been made and monogrammed for since the dawn of machine embroidery. Like I said, uniforming, you're going to find that same name patch on someone's work shirt that has been there since the dawn of our craft. And at the same time, you're going to find a ton of people who know a lot about embroidery, who are doing patch and pin expos, who are doing merch for online providers, who are also creating things beyond all of this: electronics with embedded, embroidery with embedded electronics, carbon fiber layups, highly technical work that still qualifies as machine embroidery. We are all through it. So we are in traditional methods of embroidery. We are in trending, interesting decorations. It's on the first page of Super Dry, but it's also on grandma's doilies and napkins, and all of these things fit within our milieu. We have something to address all of them, and like I said, mostly with the same equipment. So we really have a tremendous amount of versatility, which means that anything someone brings to us, we have some embroidery to address it. And so that's the thing to kind of say. It's a tremendous amount of versatility, but we also have all that uniqueness to kind of let us work towards something that's interesting, right? In any sort of particular place that we're at, we can find an embroidery to suit it. And I'm going to kind of rip through kind of quickly some of these things we talked about, our aesthetics, right? Embroidery is sculpture, it's a dimensional art. So just like this bas relief sculpture that's here, and I use this, even in a single color, embroidery has that similar play of light and shadow. We look at this piece here, traditional religious bas relief sculpture in stone. It has texture, it has layers and levels. Things are closer to us and further from us. And we look at this slab of metallics that I made for this Hanya mask, and that's one color of metallic thread. And we have differences in color, differences in shadow and shine that are based on stitch types and contrast from block to block. The unique qualities here are obvious. It's not just texture, it's not just sheen or texture, it's also contrast. And like I said, that faceting within one design, within one color inside the design itself, allows us to be very sculptural. The materials make a difference. And here I'll go ahead and pull myself out of the frame. Swapping threads makes a massive difference. The R's on the top and the bottom of that top section are the same digitized file. Absolutely nothing has changed. No density changes have been done. Nothing else changes between those two rows, except for the top is rayon and the center is a matte finish polyester. Vastly different looks with the same file, with the same setup on the same machine, two needles right next to each other. So no settings changed. On that bottom set, we have very similar color palette, but from matte finish to standard polyester to a metallic thread, we have a very different presentation with that same design. So we can use materials to make something interesting happen. Multimedia, simple embroidery with digital print can create uh, incredible depth and color fidelity with some texture. So this is a sublimation on a glitter flake applique done. And by the way, both of these are the exact same design with a change in the print. And that's actually the same glitter flake applique. It is a white polyester glitter flake that was sublimated with one set of chili designs. So this is all Albuquerque stuff, hashtag ABQ. There's red and green chili on this first one, and the second one is a scene directly from Balloon Fiesta. Those were actually run on the same file, same machine, back to back. Only thing that actually happened on the piece itself was that the first part was a standard hoodie. Second part was a glitter hoodie. We started with regular poly thread. This one was done with metallics. We can do a lot with multimedia and we can change a lot with our materials. The visual impact does not have to just be effort, right? It's greater than the effort and the material input. We can create a lot of impact without necessarily adding more time or having to do a lot of complicated setup. Creative execution. This piece was really presented to me as a big slab of thread, but I carved out the individual features of the lion, the legs, these especially on the wings and the individual feathers on the wings. And this was a hit that sold a tremendous amount of goods into this school that was using this piece. Turned out to, it started as one order, ended up being all of their athletics. And then we made multiple versions of this logo for different divisions within that group and for their local store that they ran. Skilled digitizers can do something interesting. You can take something like this that's flat and make something carved. So care, quality, and consideration. That's the difference. So though we have less fidelity in some detail for print, we have texture, we have the play of light, we have the ability to create something that is uniquely embroidered. And here's the thing: the piece on the left has a lot more detail. The piece on the right, however, done small for a left chest over text. That's the very first piece I ever won an award for. If you look at the way satin stitches are used in the bangles, you look at the way that we've used different angles in the different sections of the legs. If you look at the curvature of the fill in the stomach, we look at the way that the arms and hands have shadow and shine on them. These are unique to embroidery. And even though, yes, we could say, hey, it's the same as the piece on the left, or if we had simplified art, it would be the same as some printed piece. When we move this thing in space and you can see it in that sculptural way, it really does change that value. And people look at it in that sculptural sense and say, this is something unique. They have to feel it, they have to touch it, they have to see it to make much of it sometimes. But I think if we show it in the right light and take the right kind of images to show them, we can really give them a lot and explain a lot about our value. So we just want to make sure that we can provide them with that value and explain the best embroidered result. So it's the issue about communicating it is sometimes that people who are going for something that is a commodity are going to treat it like a commodity. And at those times when we have a customer for whom the budget is the primary example, they just want to put their logo, their graphic onto any garment or a garment in a class and get it out the door at the lowest price. Embroidery may not always be the best choice, and we may have to deal with that, right? We may have to deal with that kind of work um, being what they need or what they want. That might not be our best client if all we do is embroidery, but we can always form up. I always talk about the dream team. You form up a group of people that you trust to outsource to, and it's one of the best things you can do if you're a solo shop that is only working on one kind of decoration. However, if you present people with that option, here's the thing: yes, those people exist. But I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to somebody at a shop where somebody came to them with that argument or with that initial bill. They said, hey, here's the initial driver. Here is the initial brief. I want to hit this price point. This is what I want. Figure out the way to get it. And they never ask that customer for more information, like what is it you're trying to communicate? Who are you giving these to? What's the most important thing that you could say to them with this garment? What are you trying to get done here? Are these promotional? Who are the people who are going to look at it? They didn't ask for any extra information. And frequently enough, they may not have even offered them the other option. Say to them, hey, okay, I see you've got a price point you're trying to hit. Um, However, I just want to show you a couple options. Here is an option. It is going to cost more than what you have spec'd for each particular piece, but I think it's a high quality look that's going to bring in the kind of customers or provide the kind of experience that I think might be valuable to the people you're showing this to. Sometimes people don't want to hear it, and that's fine. And if they really are resistant, but you want to keep that customer, there's no problem with going ahead and giving them something that meets their needs. But I'm surprised at how many times that offering isn't there in the first place, or that people just get frustrated at the outset with the explanation of what they've asked for and don't realize that they may not be very tied up in that solution. They just have come to you with what they think they need, and they're just asking because that's what they know to do. They know what to ask for to the point of having that brief in their mind of what they expect, but you could consult with them and give them that option. Will you sometimes end up in the same place where they don't catch that the value of embroidery, or where you have somebody that you tell them the text can't be that small and they grouse about it? Yeah, that's going to happen, and it's not going to be infrequent, especially the small text gripe. That is going to be a part of being an embroiderer, and I'm not going to tell you it's going to go away. I won't lie to you like that, because I've certainly done my time dealing with gripes about small text. However, it I hate to go back to platitudes. The thing is, if you don't ask, if you don't offer the possibility of this high end look, if you don't offer the possibility of something more interesting, of multimedia, of a higher end garment, of embroidery versus print, and what it can do, if you don't offer it, they never ask for it. Only people who are already in the know can ask. And if you don't know whether or not they know what's available, you can't tell whether that might have been impressive, interesting to them, or you might have sparked in them a desire for your product or an understanding of what you provide. Customer education is part of it. I mean, don't be pedantic. Don't talk down to people. Don't tell them, I can't believe you don't understand how great this is. That's not the attitude we come to. What we need to do is recognize in ourselves the kind of curiosity and love that we've had for this medium, and communicate our own excitement, our own ability to geek out over this stuff, what we think is cool about it, what we think is valuable, and our own perspectives. What would we do if this logo, if this brand, if this message, if this art was our own to provide them the best result? And especially if it's embroidery, how would we make that happen? And what would we do? What do we think is cool? You're going to get customers who say, hey, I hire you to be the t-shirt machine. I hire you to be the embroidery machine. I want to put art in and get embroidery out. Those people exist. And sometimes we keep those customers around to keep solvent, and we do their work and we do it for the price that makes sense. That's fine. But for those customers who go beyond, for the customers who are willing, we may be able to create interesting solutions that don't necessarily require us to break our backs to get them done, but can be interesting, attractive, and provide something they find valuable so that they are willing to pay for us. They are willing to pay to let us do what we are the most suited to doing and that which we love. We can find our ikigai, and they can get the proper value out of the garments and out of the work that we do. So that's the thing. I think that's how it is. It's it's hard, but there are times where we have to get out there and ask. We have to. It's fine to expect the no, but when we get the yes, it allows us to shine, and it also helps us, because in the long term, in the grand scheme of things, these are the kind of customers who show these pieces to other people and explain where they got them from and give you the referrals. And other people who are of that same ilk will come together. This is how you build your tribe of people who want that kind of creative work, who want to use embroidery for its best uses, for what makes it valuable. So we have a couple comments here I'm going to go over real quick before we kind of tie this up. Like I said, I'm going to tie this up a little shorter instead of going an hour and a half like crazy. Hour 19 is already into real bonus time, but I think it's worthwhile to go ahead and grab a couple comments and then we'll finish this out. So a couple more. Sally says, well, first she said to those difficult customers, bye-bye, which I agree. And customers like that can be high maintenance and you spend so much time, make little money, not the kind of relationship you want to build. And I always get wrong the explanation for this, but the Pareto principle, I believe is what we call it, where 80% of your customers bring in 20% of your money and vice versa. That top 20% brings in most of the money and is willing to do more. If we could make more of our customers like that top 20% and spend less time and effort on them, imagine what we could do with the time that's left, either in growing our business and doing better work, cooler work, or in having some time to be alive where we're not stuck to our machines or not stuck working all the time. I'm a person who likes to work a lot and tends to work a great deal, but because I'm kind of in that ikigai space. I do a thing that I love, and I also do this so that we can all get together and help each other. But hey, these are the precious moments of your life. I know I say it a lot when I talk about pricing. You are spending the years of your life, the hours and minutes of your finite existence, making stuff for people. Make sure you're appropriately paid for it. And hey, let's try and find a way to get some of those precious moments back. Why not? Other things here. Barb says, dealing with customers that want discounts continuously are usually time consuming. You take the time to quote and then they bargain shop. Personally, I stay away with them. Ideally, we would. I will say I understand if you're a shop who's just getting out there and you're taking the business you can to make sure you're making your payments. I get that. I'm not going to criticize you for that. Sometimes I've heard people who are kind of higher rollers in this industry who've been around a lot, who already have nice client bases, kind of say things like they never took that job. Here's the thing. The temptation to stay in that place and continue to discount is there, and you have to review over time whether or not you're spending your time on things that aren't worthwhile, so that when you have your feet under you, when you are solvent, that you're not continuing to spend extra effort for less back. You have to make sure you're getting something commensurate with your effort in return. You need that to come back to you the way you're putting it out there. And so here's what I'll say: take the jobs when you need to. When the flow is rough, make sure your flow is good. Keep the needles moving, keep the registers clanging along. And at the end of the day, though, make sure you're taking stock. At the end of the day, and here we're coming up to the end of the year, it's a great time for that. Take stock of the customers you have and how they've been helping you too, how they are contributing to you continue to do what you do best. And if they don't fit, think really hard about the next time if you want to give them that discount or not. And when you do lose a job and all you got is time, don't sit in that time and wallow. Get out and hunt for customers, because of the marketing, the sharing, and here's the nicest way to say it instead of marketing and selling: the sharing of what you do best never ends. The work you show is the work you get. So get out there, show your work, and make the effort to work on your business, not just in it, in the times when you're slow, and you'll find yourself having more options. But yeah, for your t-shirt says, you make embroidery sound so good, I don't want to offer other methods of print. Yeah, it's hard. Embroidery is good. I'm going to say that print has its space always, and even for those of us who are dyed-in-the-wool embroiderers, we find that we need print. Even in categories where you might not think print is prevalent, sometimes print is the right call. There's nothing wrong with that. So when print is the right call, use print for what it is. You don't have to do it if you don't want to do it. Partner with somebody else who does, and form a relationship in which they send you embroidery and you send them print, and that's a lovely partnership that can continue on for years with the right people. There's nothing wrong with that, and the dream team is alive. I still love that concept. A couple nice things here. Joanne says, I always get so much from your shows. You just evaluate your time. Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate that. Where you're getting digitizing like that from? The digitizing was mine. And right now, unfortunately, I am booked. So I am not digitizing to get it from. If you saw Justin Armenta, who was up here earlier from GAAdigitizing.com, he does good work. Vitor from Vitor Digitizing does good work. There's a lot of people who do good work. I'm not going to mention them all, but Justin was here in the chat. So, hey, you get your first mention, my friend, GAA Digitizing. There's lots of great digitizers out there who know more about what they're doing and who think of digitizing as an interpretive art. I will say this: you're probably not finding them on Fiverr. So if you're looking for your digitizing at the lowest rate, just like people looking for their embroidery at the lowest rate, they probably are going to get the basic version. And that's, hey, sometimes how it is. Not always how it is, but sometimes how it is. You want to work with somebody who's going to be an artistic partner with you, you're probably going to pay a little more, and you're going to have to move that along the line. But yeah, look for digitizers who do that kind of work. Look at examples of their work. If they don't have good examples of their work, then don't work for them. Ask for examples. It's how it is. And also digitizers, if you're out there and you don't have samples yet, do some self-directed projects, even if you have to barter with someone to get them on someone else's machines. It's just the price of doing this work is being able to show your work. It's like being in a guild. You have to do your journeyman work and you have to have your masterpieces to be a master. It's how it is. Samples are what speaks. The stitches speak for you. All right. So a couple of things. Sally says, absolutely. They don't know it's possible. And so that's being trying to sell yourself. Absolutely. Why should we expect it? I don't know what's possible in tons of other mediums. I don't know everything that's possible in someone else's work. If I went to someone who is an amazing stonemason, I don't know all the different ways that you cut stone to make something look a certain way. I'm hoping and trusting them to do the right work and to show me what the best choices are and to give me some options so I can make the best looking piece fit into my budget for my home, my wall, my counter, my whatever. Somebody who's doing that work is going to know better than I do how to work stone. And I'm trusting that. Um, Hopefully, we are doing the same for our clients, and we should think of ourselves as embroidery consultants, I think. Mark is absolutely right here. Mark White says, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Yep, you miss all the shots you don't take, folks. I'm not always great at it either. I get worried about getting shot down, but I've had to learn that over years is that offering the option and putting that work in front of people helps. And here's the other thing, too. Like I said earlier, if you make samples, you get to preload these people. You show them things that are possible. And if they see in a sample something they want to explore, they can ask you, and then you don't have to do all of that work. So having good sales samples, having good examples of embroidery can also help you get there. Show people techniques that you think are interesting via those samples, and then they don't have to use that imagination. And frankly, I always like to pretend I'm whispering. I'm like, oh, there's no customers here, right? Like 85% of people have no creative vision at all. They just have to see it. They have to see it to know they want it. So show it to them, right? That's how it goes. All right, last couple comments. Beck says, thanks for the great class. When the headaches go away, we'll both celebrate. Yeah, both of us. I hope you're feeling better soon, Beck. Pam says, valuable information. Is doing a craft fair tomorrow. Yeah, absolutely. Show them the coolness of embroidery. Get geeked out. If you're excited, they get excited. People warm up to the temperature in the room. So yeah, get geeked out. Show them how cool it is. It is cool. Kingsbury Crafts, again, Barb says, thanks. Information is valuable. Love it. Bill says, I screen print, make vinyl signage, vehicle lettering. Embroidery is the only work I look forward to now. I mean, I love embroidery too, but I'll say this. I've done vinyl car wraps. I used to do vinyl windows. I did tons of print, and I did tons of sublimation for a while. They all have certain things that you love about them. I will say, though, my love is always embroidery out of those, but they all have their place and they all have their usefulness. All right, folks. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close it down for the day. What I will say, it is Veterans Day, so thank you to all the veterans and thank you for your service. And also, in general, we had a day today where we talked a lot about recognition, and when we talked about award shows and all this stuff. And thank you guys for who had voted for me for that. We talked about recognition, and we talked about communication, and we talked about communicating value. What I want you to do right now for yourself: number one, pat yourself on the back. You are here learning and doing your best. Number two, think about the things that make you uniquely valuable, and it might be the stuff that you think is weird about you. Trust me, the things that you might think are weird might be the things that set you apart, might be the most interesting things that are there. Think about what makes you unique. Think about what makes your work unique. Get excited and explore the curiosity you had about your own craft, and then think about how to express that to people, and let it be exciting, let it be interesting, and let yourself explain that to people. Share the best of what you love of your craft with the people around you. They will understand the value. Now, certainly know your customers, know your audience, do the best you can to solve their problems and make them the hero. But when you're talking about embroidery, don't apologize for it. Exalt in the things that are wonderful about it and share that love with the people who are buying from you. And also, like I said, pat yourselves on the back, take care, spend your time the best you can. And like I said, love that curiosity, love what's weird, love what's unique, and get out there and share it with the world. All right, folks, with that, end of an Education Friday, and hopefully be back next week. Maybe some more digitizing content, not just a discussion like this, maybe a little more technical stuff like we like to do. But I'm glad you hung with me, and I can't wait to see you again next Friday.